If you're drinking any type of liquid, make sure to swallow now. Like, swallow it right now. I know you've heard that before, but seriously, all jokes aside, make sure you're not drinking any hot liquid or a beer. Sit down. This is kind of groundbreaking news, and I'm totally joking. There's no groundbreaking news here. Honestly, this is pure speculation. This is just me talking out of my ass because why not, right? This is purely me going into the realm of the what if. And today, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. I keep hearing rumors, I keep reading articles, I keep seeing videos and different comments about potentially there being a huge shakeup within the action figure community. And, within like a few, I would say like a year or two, it could be a completely different manufacturer making the action figures that you collect and love. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the DC stuff is supposed to be coming up, and then as well as the Marvel and the Star Wars collectibles. Again, I don't know exactly which because, it's kind of vague. I know us as collectors, we usually just boil it down to like Marvel Legends, Black Series line, and the DC Multiverse, but there are a lot of other like sublines. So I'm not sure exactly how things are going to, pan out. I'm not sure if this means that everything that is DC related is going to be up for grabs, or just the DC Multiverse line, or just the DC Direct, the Page Punchers line, or just the Marvel Legends line. Could it be like some of the other action figures or some of the other collectibles that Hasbro manufactures for Disney? We just don't know that at this point, but all I will say is that the main lines, at least, they do appear to be up for grabs in the like next year or so when the contracts are up, both for McFarlane as well as Hasbro. And the real question is, who's going to get what? And we could potentially see a huge shakeup. And let me just start off by saying, before I get into like the pure speculation of all this and what I personally predict to be happening within the next year or so, I will say this is good for nobody. And I know a lot of people out there are thinking, well, it's good for a shakeup. It's, I want something new. I want something innovative and creative from these OMs. And I'm tired of getting the same stuff from Hasbro and from McFarlane. But let's sit down and think about things for just a split second here, guys, because this could this could have huge ramifications for your collection, for what it is that you love to put on your display. And this could, show itself in a lot of different ways. We could have a completely different, your budget could be completely destroyed because we don't know if the prices are going to go up or down. Let's not forget, there's also this like huge potential for a new like import tax that is just like hovering over us collectors. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I don't know. I don't really follow politics, but I did hear that rumbling within the community that could affect action figures and just plastic as a whole. And by the way, not just action figures, like a lot of stuff that, comes from other countries could be affected by this import tax. But look, beyond that, it could have a huge impact on your collecting capability. I'll give you guys an example. Let's just say theoretically somebody else acquires the Marvel Legends line. Doesn't have to be McFarlane. It could be anybody within the realm of the collectible, the manufacturing side of things. There could be some huge ramifications. You could get a brand new scale, for example. Instead of just getting a regular, close to 1/12 scale Marvel Legends line, we could potentially be receiving like a 1/10 scale line from somebody else, or something a little bit smaller to the 1/12 scale, maybe a truer 1/12 scale from a regular OM. And that could like essentially throw off your entire collection, because there are a lot of collectors, and I'll include myself in that group, where scaling is very important. It's very important to have your action figures scale within the same universe. Not to mention the style or the aesthetics could be completely different, and that could just throw your entire like collecting time into disarray. Like, you would have to make some pretty tough choices, kind of similar to what people had to do when Mattel lost the license to McFarlane, and then you were kind of stuck in like no man's land. You didn't know exactly what to do, whether you were just going to continue fleshing out maybe your old Mattel figures, some figures that maybe you missed out on, or whether you were going to just combine the two, even though they didn't scale well next to each other, or were you just going to sell your entire DC Multiverse Mattel action figure line and just start collecting McFarlane figures? It was a huge dilemma. There were people like ripping their hairs out and their eyebrows and just their nose hairs out. All type of hairs were being ripped out. Let's just put it that way, because people just didn't know exactly what to do. And this could potentially be something that we run into as the collectible community. Let's say that Hasbro loses the license and now somebody else comes along and is like, hey, I want to make action figures for you, but I'm going to make them a little bit or slightly bigger. I personally am definitely not looking forward to that. Having said all of that, as I said, Hasbro has a potential to lose a license, and it seems more likely that Hasbro will lose it. And the thing that people keep pointing back to, and this is honestly something that I didn't even pay too much attention to, has to do with some of the reveals that Hasbro has had recently, where it's a lot of reuse, a lot of body molds that are really old. They're not really doing a lot of innovative stuff. Like the last really crazy innovative feature that they brought to us was like the pinless technology. It was the newer Renew Your Vows Spider-Man body mold. And aside from that, there hasn't been, and then the female body mold, but that was what, like 3-4 years ago. Like aside from that, there hasn't been anything groundbreaking, anything that just like, gets her nips hard or anything crazy like that. It's kind of been pretty consistently, subpar, or not subpar, but just really nothing worth noting. And I think that could potentially be like a huge red flag as to why Hasbro isn't trying to throw any more money at the Marvel Legends line, because they maybe not only do they feel maybe that they're going to lose a license, but maybe they're just not going to chase it as much. There is a huge possibility for Hasbro, and I've honestly floated this idea out there, that they just focus in on their in-house stuff, right? I mean, their game boards always sell incredibly well, but you have, for example, the G.I. Joe line. They could continue to throw as much innovation, as much new tech into their G.I. Joe line, as well as their Transformers stuff. That's stuff that they don't have to pay licensing fees for, and so it makes more sense for them to try to focus in on that rather than trying to chase other different franchises. What's interesting is there's also a rumor that Hasbro could potentially throw their hat into the ring for the DC universe, which is kind of interesting. Could you imagine a scenario where Hasbro takes over the DC multiverse, and then maybe McFarlane takes over the Marvel Legends line? That would be pretty interesting. There are some rumors out there that they're just going to split everything apart. Like potentially there could be multiple different OMs owning the license or being able to have the license. We talked about this not too long ago, where like Hasbro had some stuff in their contract that like limited Marvel Select from doing certain things, or things of that nature. In my personal opinion, I've said this before and I'll say it again, if I'm Warner Bros, if I'm Disney, I'm not going to limit myself that way. I'm going to just allow different scales, different OMs to try their hand at my collectibles, and then whichever sells better, that's the one that I'm going to lean on the hardest. But I wouldn't limit myself by saying, well, Marvel Select, I'm not going to allow you to release this many, or I'm only going to allow you to release this many because Hasbro wants me to limit you. I just wouldn't allow that. So look, all speculation aside, what is my personal prognostication? What am I predicting here? Honestly, I feel like Hasbro is really going to just put themselves out of contention. I think their main objective here is to focus in on themselves. We've heard a lot of them trying to move into the digital realm, and that's, a real world possibility for them. They want to be innovative. They want to be like the first to throw their hat in the ring when it comes down to that. But in my personal opinion, I think all of that is going to lead to their downfall in terms of keeping these licenses. I do believe that there's a strong possibility that McFarlane is able to acquire the Marvel license or Jaded Toys. I floated this around for quite some time, and the main reason why I think Jaded Toys has a very strong possibility here, more so I think than the DC or McFarlane, I believe Jaded Toys has kind of been saving themselves for this exact possibility, for this scenario. If you really pay attention to what Jaded Toys has been doing, not only have they been releasing some absolutely fire stuff, but they really haven't picked up that many licenses. I mean, so far, I believe, like off the top of my head, they're doing the mascots, they're doing the Street Fighter stuff, they're doing the Mega Man stuff, as well as the new Scooby-Doo waves that they're working on. That's about it. They're not really doing much other than that. I think they've done like some die-cast cars here and there, but in terms of like 1/12 collectible action figures, they're not really doing too much in that regard. So that makes me believe that maybe they're saving up, or they're trying to kind of throw all of their potential future resources into acquiring whether that's maybe like the Black Series line. I'm not sure if the Black Series line belongs to Hasbro or is just a designation for Star Wars collectibles at that scale. But let's just assume that it's, belongs to Disney. I would say it'd be interesting to see like the Black Series line move on to Jada Toys, or potentially maybe even the Marvel Legends line. And again, because they've been so selective with what they've been picking up, I think that's like a huge indicator, at least in my personal opinion, that Jada Toys will be a huge player in there. But, it's crazy to think, or it's crazy to assume that McFarlane won't throw his bid at everything. In my personal opinion, the only thing that McFarlane shouldn't even touch would be the Star Wars line, because I couldn't imagine the Star Wars line, having those type of articulation schemes that McFarlane throws at them. But then again, sometimes McFarlane action figures are, closer to like semi-articulated statues, or like pre-posed action figures, especially like their bigger ones, like the Gorilla Grods, the Dark Sides. They display better in like an upright, normal, generic position. And that's kind of what I feel like with the Black Series line recently. The articulation is not great. They're like single jointed elbows, single jointed knees. So I feel like maybe McFarlane could work in there to get, like certain characters would work under the McFarlane line. In terms of, I've talked so much about this, but the McFarlane, the pre-posed Marvel statues that he's been working on, that to me, in my personal opinion, was kind of like a little bit of an audition for McFarlane. I think Disney wanted to see how well they could sell. If they sold well, maybe that was a huge indicator that they could handle the Marvel license, or maybe even more licenses in the future. And let's be brutally honest, in terms of sales, you can go onto any website. It appears that McFarlane just sells very well. Like, his product moves well. I'm not sure if that's because people prefer him more, or because his action figures are way more affordable than most Marvel Legends action figures. And there are some outliers out there of collectibles from McFarlane that are, usually pretty expensive, or they, break boundaries that I think collectors are not comfortable with. But for the most part, like for example, a regular DC Multiverse action figure you can pick up for $22.99. And in some cases, they come with a plethora of different accessories. Whereas in like maybe the Marvel Legends line is a higher price point. You're usually looking at like $25 to $28 for a regular figure. Sometimes some of those don't come with as many accessories. They're a much smaller scale, much less plastic. I talked about this in my previous video pretty extensively. I just don't think the math adds up in my mind. So we'll see. Like I said, in my personal opinion, again, purely speculation. I'm not an insider. I don't have any information. This is just off the top of my head, just for the sake of making content and arguing with you guys. I'm going to say Jada Toys picks up something. I'm not sure what it is, whether it's, the Star Wars or whether it's Marvel. I definitely feel like that's a real world possibility. In terms of the DC multiverse, I actually feel like McFarlane holds on to something. I'm not sure if they just let him keep on to like maybe the DC director Page Punchers or the DC Multiverse line. What's really interesting about what McFarlane did here, and I think this was his way of setting himself up for this particular negotiation, I think he's broken down his entire line into like different subsections. If you really stop to think about it, they have like the DC Multiverse line, they have the DC Collector's Edition line, they have the DC Direct line, and they have now the Page Punchers line. There are like 4 different kind of sublines that McFarlane works with when it comes down to DC collectibles, not to mention like their animated stuff, which is a completely different conversation, but you get where I'm going, and not to mention the statues. So there's a possibility in there where he's able to negotiate to keep only one of those lines. Maybe he doesn't keep the DC Multiverse line. Maybe that goes to like, people have floated around like Jazzwares, for example. Maybe even Jada picks that up. But now he can make a bid for, hey, can, Warner Bros, can I keep maybe, or DC, can I keep the license for maybe the collector's edition line, where I just manufacture action figures with, a few extra face plates and this and that at the 1/10 scale for $30. And then maybe somebody else can manufacture the regular DC Multiverse line at like that $22 to $25 price point. Or maybe he decides to only do Page Punchers, those action figures with comic books in the back. or the DC Direct line. I mean, I think he's given himself like different avenues, and I think that's absolutely genius from McFarlane. So I personally feel like there's a possibility that McFarlane maybe loses a couple of these to other different OMs, and then he's able to hold on to at least a couple of these, and then adds maybe either the Marvel collectibles or the Star Wars collectibles. But as I said, the way that they're going to break this down, I think, at least in my personal opinion, they're going to allow manufacturers to hold different licenses at different scales. So I think there's a possibility of McFarlane maybe continuing to make DC action figures with certain restrictions, and then allowing another manufacturer to also make DC action figures, as well as same thing with, you know, Marvel and Star Wars. I think it's a smarter business decision. And also you're going to be able to kind of break down the numbers a little bit more, because sometimes certain things sell over others. And I think a prime example of that is how McFarlane has broken things down. He's able to kind of see which subline sells better, and maybe we continue to see page punchers more consistently down the line, or maybe because he doesn't see those numbers, he doesn't see those sales, maybe he scales back on them. So only time will tell. If I had to predict something, I will say Hasbro loses everything. I think there's a number of different red flags. A lot of it has to do with the fact that there's a lack of innovation on the part of Hasbro. They're really scaling back, and I think the characters that are being released, or the characters that are being leaked recently, I think that's a prime example. There's no big names. There's going to be a bunch of like C-list Marvel characters with almost no accessories probably attached to them, and that's going to be the future of Hasbro until they or Marvel Legends, until they lose the license, and then eventually it goes to somebody else. So I think there will be some huge shakeups. I think Hasbro loses everything. I believe that potentially Jaded Toys picks up Marvel or McFarlane. And then as far as like Star Wars, I think that goes to somebody else completely. Maybe Jazzwares or, Jax, who knows? The possibilities are endless, but I do feel like Hasbro is going to lose something. There's no way they hold on to everything. They're losing money like crazy, and then McFarlane just sells well. Whether this, I don't know how the numbers work, whether they're taking into account the fact that a lot of his figures do end up like on clearance aisles and clearance stores. I'm not sure if that they take that into account, or are those considered just sales right out the door, like right as soon as they go to the like retailer, whether it's Walmart or Target. Is that considered just already an automatic sale? We just don't know. Only time will tell. I'm like I said, I think there will be a shakeup. It's not good for the community, at least in my personal opinion, but that's just my personal deep opinion. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you guys feel like there will be some shakeups? Do you feel like everybody just keeps the same licenses and I'm making too much out of nothing? I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one, and make sure, enjoy the hobby. Pose your figures, photograph them, have fun with them. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.